Thanks for coming, lasting through lunch and into the afternoon, for those who are still here. I'm going to run through some topics, marketing automation and web personalization with Drupal. And it's good, pretty introductory, just going to go over some concepts and then get into some of the things you can do with Drupal and some of the contrib modules. A little bit about me. My name is Jason Want. I'm a Drupal lead architect with MediaCurrent. I've been working with Drupal for several years now. Started off with account management, moved into site building, development, both back-end and front-end, focusing on back-end now, doing leading projects. I'm in New Orleans, flew in for this. We run a small DrupalCamp there. Just settled on a venue that's March 25th next year. Haven't promoted it yet, but it's going to be in New Orleans. If anyone had a good time in DrupalCon New Orleans, come back, have a good time at the camp. I help organize that, so we're putting it together now. You can reach me Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Drupal.org. And a little bit, let's see here. Yep, today we're going to talk about web personalization. Then we're going to go through a personalization checklist, all the things we can do to get ready to personalize content. And then we're also going to talk about marketing automation, what that is. And then go into, with Drupal, kind of the contrib space, what you can do with some of the contributor modules, both for marketing automation and web personalization. A little bit about my sponsor, MediaCurrent, single source provider of development, design, and strategy of 60 plus team members distributed throughout the US. And I'm sure you've already heard quite a bit about MediaCurrent. So web personalization, what we're going to talk about is what it is and why use it and some of the available solutions in the marketplace. So personalization, it's about creating personalized web experiences based on the audience's characteristics and their interactions with the site and what their intent is when they come to your website, kind of what information are they looking to get. And we can talk about some of the personalization criteria. So this is the things that you can do to categorize your audience and different types of ways to categorize them. Implicit versus explicit. First and third party data, non-personal and personal attributes, and then user interactions. And we'll go into each one of those here. Implicit. So these are implied but not plainly expressed. So these are things that a site visitor will come and interact with your site content in a certain way that makes us think that they're a certain audience type or they're interested in certain things. They haven't told you directly, but their interactions and their page visits kind of imply that. Compare that to explicit criteria where they've maybe filled out a form or became an authenticated user, filled out a user profile, and kind of just identified who they are and what they're interested in. Or on top of that is some of the other characteristics you get from their site visits through your Google Analytics, like where they're at geographically, what kind of viewport are they using, what kind of device are they using to browse your site. We also have first party and third party, pretty self-explanatory. First party is the data you get from the individual, and that's from their interactions with your website, or any of your other websites or interactions you can get through email marketing and things like that. Third party is when you pay for data for your audience, and that can come through your third party vendors if you interact with, or you pay for Salesforce or Optimizely. They can have data on individuals that they can provide to help incorporate into profiles for them, so then you can then later personalize based on that. One thing I came across is demand base. Has anyone heard of demand base? It's pretty interesting stuff where they, the one small part I know about it is they basically have a registry of IP addresses, and they can determine that based on the visitor's IP address, they most likely belong to certain organizations. So then you can start speaking to them directly as, say, they work in an office, their IP address is associated with Xerox, or they're with another brand like Target. So then you can talk to them directly as if you already know they probably work for Target, and so you can start speaking to them. Non-personal attributes, you'll see some overlap with some of these categories, like explicit data, like geolocation, device, and those non-personal attributes for your site visitors don't really tell us about who they are. And And that's more personal, like age, gender, demographic information, or they filled out a form, which would be explicit criteria where they've told you, I am company X and I have this many employees and my revenue is this range, something like that. And then we have another category, user interactions, and this is, implicit information where based on the way they interact with your site, like the time of day, you start to understand a little bit about your audience, when they're browsing your site, and site searches and forms they fill out, or form abandonment, like they go through a shopping cart process and then they leave the cart. So when I started preparing for this presentation, I did some research, and I'm starting to get into these topics, so I'm doing research and all the time getting more information. But this is an example from Optimizely. I'm going to talk about how they set out to redesign their homepage, and they wrote some blog posts, pretty interesting. You can check it out yourself. They're updating the information as they implemented it, and then they reported on it and provided some information on it. This was their homepage before they set out to personalize it. It's kind of a standard, you've probably seen this before, it's like a tagline and then a call to action, just hopefully getting you in past, engaged in the site. And this is after, where they have a personal message here, good evening, so they know what time you're coming to the site, so they're speaking with you directly and they're engaging with you. And we'll get into a little more into this, how they've kind of personalized different parts of this, but you see basically a message, a background image, and then some call to actions here. And so when they set out to this, they wanted to step away from just having one specific message. When you're looking at your customers, your audience, you have different types. And when you design your homepage, that's why a lot of people tend to put sliders up in the top, because they want to speak to everyone, but we all know the troubles with sliders. So instead of doing that, they wanted to set out and find a way to talk to all their different audience types. And when they went through that, they started going first to categorize their audiences by first named accounts. And that's when they started working with demand-based, so they can figure out the named accounts when they come to their site. Xerox, Adidas, and Target, Microsoft. And then they're talking about industries or verticals, geography, customers, and then engaged visitors, people who are there for longer periods of time. So then when they set out to design their personalized homepage, they just broke it up into small pieces, and it goes down further on the page. But we'll kind of focus on this hero part, where they've got the background image, the headline, and the calls to action. So we saw good evening. Here's another thing, good afternoon. You see the background image has changed. And you could see how, if you wanted to, depending on where the person is geographically located, you could show them a background image that's more suited for them. So you could try and connect with them on that level. Or, seasonal. So if it's in the middle of winter and you kind of want to brighten up someone's day by showing them a nice picture of a beach or something like that. And here's one of the example of their named accounts. So someone's coming to their site using an IP address associated with Microsoft, for example, and so they're speaking directly to them as a named account to try and increase engagement. And another example, Adidas, where the background image is also kind of reflects the Adidas brand a little bit. And what they saw was an increase in engagement and an increase in people traveling to those landing pages to get more information, the solutions page. And they also saw an increase in people starting new accounts. And what they were worried about is showing decrease in down funnel leads, which means that getting a lot of people through that weren't qualified. So they didn't see any negative side effects to this. Well, I should probably rephrase it. I don't know if they didn't see any, but they didn't report on any downsides to this approach. And why are we using personalization? Well, we kind of saw that with just improved visitor engagement, increased content stickiness, people coming, staying on the site longer, coming back more often, and then ultimately higher conversion rates. So they're coming through the funnel and then they're converting more because the site is speaking to them directly. It's more personalized. Evergage put together a survey in 2015 just to get information about why people are considering personalization. And this survey is available. You can go out and go through a gated form to get the white paper and get the information yourself. But what people are after is increased visitor engagement. 73% of the survey participants, they have a perceived benefit that they're going to get more engagement out of the site visitors. And then another question was where they're using it. So people aren't just using it on the web, they're using it in their apps as well, and on their mobile site, and then in applications. And then the question of the survey, because I think a lot of people aren't using it because of probably the financial obstacles to implementing some of these solutions. But a lot of people, they're sold already and they're planning on using it. And just going to bullet point here, see the solutions out there that you can take a look at. Optimizely, kind of the ones that I pointed out in Evergage, along with HubSpot and Acquia Lift. Who's familiar with Acquia Lift? All right. Who's familiar with Acquia? All right. Excuse me. So Acquia is a Drupal service provider. They're really behind the Drupal project. Dries is co-founder of Drupal. He's also one of the head persons in charge of Acquia, and this is their personalization software that ties together with Drupal. And we'll get a little more into that specifically later on. So personalization checklists. These are things that we should do to prepare ourselves to implement a personalized website. And we're going to go through these a little more in detail. So first and foremost, kind of adopt an experimental and data-driven mindset so that before you start doing this, you're going to look at your analytics and make decisions based on analytics, not on what you think may or may not work. I mean, you experiment, but you want to make sure to have measurable goals to determine whether you're going to continue using. Segment your audience. Kind of talked about that a little bit. Create personas from those segments. Development content strategy, and then you design and build the platform. And then, of course, coming back to the data, you're going to define your measurements of success. So, experiment and data-driven mindset. And it's just becoming more familiar with analytics of your site. Who uses Google Analytics on their sites or their client sites? Everybody. Who's certified Google Analytics? One. So becoming certified, you'll just become more familiar with those tools that are available to you. And then using that information to make decisions about how you're going to even approach a personalized content. And then, like I said, kind of develop a plan to implement these things and then iterate on that. So you're experimenting, but you're using the data to plan your next experiment. Segmenting your audience. So we'll go through, just identifying groups and your audience. I think we all have, when you're interacting with, if you're building sites for your clients, knowing their audience, or building a site for yourself, knowing your audience, I think you'll find ways to divide that up. And some of those strategies are demographic, and those are, gender, age, things like that, geographical differences, where your customers are they local or are they national, and those differences between those different areas if you have a large geographical region. Behavioral. I always get behavioral and psychographic a little mixed up, but behavioral are kind of attitudes and values towards your product or your service. So getting to know your audience and how they already feel about your service or product offerings. And then psychographic is like who those people are and what's the day in the lives of their shoes. So as your target audience, 20 to 30 something that maybe not have children, and their lifestyles and things like that, and their values and attitudes, regardless, of your product. And so that's a kind of difference between those two, and segmenting your audience up, figuring out where they are within those categories. And then from that, you'll create user personas. And these are kind of fictional representations of your ideal customers. When you look at your current customer base, your clients' customers, and you use those categories to divide them up, you'll try to find out your ideal customer, and then you'll find out what categories they are, and then you develop a persona based on those, and you'll generally pick 3 of them. You don't want to get too many, because then you're your content on your site will just kind of get diluted a little bit. So focus on 3. And like I mentioned, speak to your, look at your current customers, and you can even pick from your current customers, the success stories and interview them. So go through an interview process where you're researching those individuals, you're asking them questions like, why did you choose us? Who else were you choosing? Why did you choose us versus them? And getting to know them. And then when you find that information, you interview them, and you're building a story about that individual and how that relates to your company or your clients and how they're choosing that information. You'll take that other information, you'll get their background, their demographics, their psychographics, right? What it's like to be in their shoes, the kind of the life they live, and that will help you determine the marketing information that's relevant to them. So where do they get their news? Where do they go to find recommendations for a particular service or product? And then also on top of that, what actually influences them to make a decision about hiring a company or buying a product? And you tie all that together and you develop a story about this person. I feel like I'm flying through this here. I know I have a lot of material. But this kind of information I took this from a Media Current buyer persona template. You can find that on MediaCurrent.com and it'll walk you through this process. So it's a blueprint, and then you can do that. Right, and so once we have that information, you've got, you've divided your audience up, you develop these personas, and you have become very familiar with your ideal customer and all the information that they're using to choose a product and service. And then when you take that and you develop the content strategy to that, you start and you take an inventory of your current content on your site. And you get very familiar with the content that you're putting out there. And then you're comparing that content to your personas. So your personas have a story. They're this person. They're considering these things when making a choice. And they have these questions about your product or service when they're evaluating your product. And then you compare those questions to your current content, and you decide whether or not you're missing any content. Are they asking questions about security or support? And if you're a web service company and you're talking about how you can do design and development, but you're not talking about support, post-launch support, and that's something that's missing, you can create content to answer those questions. And so as you take that inventory, you identify those gaps, and you kind of create content. Go ahead.
Where are you getting the personas, concerns, and questions?
Through your research and through your questionings and your interviews.
Okay.
So when you ask maybe you recruit from your current customers, and you're asking them how they decided, why did they decide you versus someone else? Well, you answered my questions here, or maybe, I was really wondering what happened post-launch support, if we continue with that example, and through my conversations with your sales team or other people, you answer that. But then you go back and you look at your content inventory, and you see that you're not actually communicating that on the website, for example.
So so they're not customers, like abandoned carts, right? It's really hard to get that information.
Right. If you do have a way to communicate to those people, if they've already put an email address in, sometimes you can create rules to send abandoned cart notification, right? And you can try to reach out to those people. We can get a little bit into I can continue with that example with marketing automation. So you can set additional triggers. So, 24 hours, you say, hey, come back to the cart. You've still got these shoes in your shopping cart, which is what I got last week when I was trying to buy some shoes. And then maybe 2 days later, you send them a survey or something. You can try and re-engage them to get them to answer those questions. That's another aspect. But if you don't know who they are, right, it's hard to talk to them. Another bullet point here. Once you identify those gaps and you're writing content, you can create a calendar so that you can regularly create content for your site to answer those questions on a regular basis. So the question for support, if we go with that example, you have different, if you do 3 personas and they're looking for slightly different answers to that question, what's your post-launch support, you can create a calendar where you're posting content about post-launch support that's specific for each one of those personas. So if they have slightly different questions that need to be answered, you can still put out, somewhat similar content about answering that question, but you can write variations to answer for the different target audience. And then configuring funnels. So as you're writing this content and you're thinking about how to carry someone through the conversion funnel, they want people to come to your site, read through your content so they can answer their questions, and then you're incorporating calls to actions there to take them from reading your content to maybe downloading a white paper to get more information, or contacting sales, for example. And then when you have, I kind of just mentioned that, where if you're writing a piece about support, post-launch support, you can write variations on that to kind of answer the variations of those different personas. And that's when you start talking about personalization. So you take the strategy, you fill in the gaps, you create a calendar, and then you plan for variations of that content and then put that back into the calendar. So you're iterating on your content and trying to answer those questions for the different audience segments. And then here comes the hard part. You have a question, sir?
So the content variations that you are creating, are you creating them on a specific for a blog, or you're creating a algorithm for the entire content? For example, if you have like 1,000 nodes, or 10,000 nodes, right? So
you're talking about like the technical solution to how you achieve that. We can talk about that a little bit later, but it just depends. I think this is kind of the sections, like how you're going to do that. And there's no easy answer right now. I think we'll jump into the Acquia Lift solution and their solution to do that. But right, you have to consider how you're going to achieve that, and some of the other questions to answer is kind of how you're going to design for that, and then the technical solution to build for that. And then on top of that is kind of how you're treating, how those solutions differ for anonymous versus authenticated users, and then any technical requirements for that, so performance considerations and things like that. Brainstorming, there's no out-of-the-box solution right now. Well, for 7 there is somewhat, but you can, create blocks, or you can create, a paragraph. Who's familiar with paragraphs in 7 and 8? So you can create paragraphs for your variations, and you could identify it with taxonomies. So you can identify a piece of content on that level, like a paragraph level, with audience segment, what part in the buyer's journey they're in, or geographic location. And we'll see that a little bit in the Drupal 7 personalization module here at the end of the presentation. And then you kind of deliver those variations to the end user. And if they're authenticated, we can use, and they've self-identified with some of those characteristics, or you've been able to identify them through their interactions with the site, then you can use those identifications with that user with the content and match it up, through views, contextual filters, and things like that to deliver that personalization to them. Anonymous users, it's a little trickier, right? Because then you have to deliver those variations to the client, maybe in a JSON object in Drupal settings, and then you're writing client-side logic to determine who that person is, what characteristics they have, if you can store that client-side in local storage, and then kind of serve that on the fly on the client side. Those are some ideas on how to do it. Those are all kind of custom solutions. There's nothing out of the box that does that right now. Part of the checklist is defining your measurements of success. That's kind of outlining your KPIs, how you're going to measure and define success. And that kind of goes based on getting familiar with the analytics beforehand, setting benchmarks, kind of what you're experiencing now, and then setting some goals for each part of your experimentation. And those can be centered around these analytic points, page views, time on site, and things like that. And then, I think it's important to kind of set time boxing your you're going to try content variation of just this one call to action with different language, different button variations, different background images, and we're going to do that for a month and see what works. So putting that in perspective of time boxing so that you can measure it, but then also consider seasonality. I worked with a project where their business is very seasonal. They have spikes just after kids go back to school, just at the end of summer, New Year's resolutions, and then just before summer starts. So for them to test the success of anything, they would have to kind of repeat it in those peaks, those seasonal peaks of traffic, or else it would just kind of be hard to figure out if it was the seasonality something or if it was the traffic that was coming to their site. All right, so marketing automation, again, we're just going to go through what it is, why use it, and some of the available solutions. There we are. Marketing automation. Here's a quote from a former colleague, Adam Wade. He's now at Salesforce. And take a minute to read it. And for me, marketing automation is it's a platform that helps you automate all of your repeated marketing tasks. So follow-up emails or a series of steps that you take with a prospect. You send them a welcome email, you follow up with them, and if you can, anything that you find yourself repeating, you can probably put into a marketing automation platform and have it kind of do that on autopilot and free yourself up to pursue other things. That's kind of what I just said. Originally, it kind of focused on email marketing. So who uses Constant Contact or MailChimp, something like that? I'm not familiar with those too much. I don't know if they offer these things, but I'd be interested to know as we go through. So those tools, I think, focus on email marketing, but marketing automation services kind of step up, and they provide how you can string together several actions. So, and we'll talk about a little bit more. Several steps, you can put those together so it can automate several emails like that. And then they also offer some reporting tools as well. So based on your email marketing, maybe it's A/B testing of a certain email, they'll provide that reporting too. Does MailChimp offer that?
They just launched.
They just launched it, okay. And Constant Contact, I think they do reporting, but I don't know if they do A/B testing.
Yeah, so they do A/B testing. A/B testing in the email was always there. But they recently launched where you can actually call all these attributes and use it for doing the A/B, for doing the personalization.
Okay.
And the emails as well.
All right. Thank you. And what they call advanced email marketing. So on top of personalizing your emails, like dropping in tokens from your constituents, their first name and other things about them, you take that a step further. And what kind of vertical they're in or what kind of position, if you know their job position, you can create content variations within your emails based on those segments. And then there's the A/B testing, so you can set up variations, and then one that is getting more clicks, more opens, they'll start delivering that more. Lead nurturing, let's see here, lead scoring and grading, prospect activity tracking, forms and landing pages, and reporting. So all those things are kind of bundled into marketing automation services. And we'll go through, I pulled some examples from Pardot. That is what we use internally at MediaCurrent, and that's the one I've started to focus on in my contrib work. So here we got personalization. We've got, your first name here, and then this is the dynamic content. These are some of the variations that you can use. So you can set up variations. So based on verticals, if you want to write a whole paragraph to introduce your email speaking directly to someone within the media vertical or higher ed, you can do that here. And then this is the lead nurturing. This is what I was hinting at, where you can set up a series of emails and actions to take based on certain actions taken by the recipient So whether or not they've opened the email or whether or not they've clicked on a certain link within the email, you can automatically follow them up with another email or action. And that's just not emails. You can also create actions so that you can, maybe if you integrate with Salesforce, you can push something over to Salesforce so that a salesperson can follow up on that lead. So you can tie all, you set these up as I think it's called a drip in Pardot terms. And then once people trigger something on your site, they fill out a form, they can be put into the series of events, and it happens automatically. So a lot of work in the front end, but once you set it up, people that come to your site trigger this, and it processes on its own. And then it will alert you if you need to take other steps. Lead scoring. So as people interact with your site or your email or even offline marketing at events or other things like that, if that gets fed back into your marketing automation platform, they can get points for their different type of interactions. So if they download a white paper, we'll say they fill out a contact form, they downloaded a white paper, they registered for a webinar, they get scored, and then once they hit a qualifying score, say 100, that's considered a qualified lead, and then you can push that over to Salesforce, so then your sales team doesn't get necessarily bogged down with following up on cold prospects. So once they're qualified, you can take actions like that. Also, lead grading. Pardot offers this so that as people interact with your company and your site and other marketing channels, you get to know more about them. So, for example, at some of your sites, Media Current site, we have a lot of content, a lot of developers come, or a lot of people that are learning Drupal come, and they may fill out forms because they want additional information, and they self-identify as someone that is learning Drupal, or they're a small business that isn't really our sweet spot of customer. So then as they interact, we can grade them so that if they come in, our target, our ideal customer is in this vertical of this size, of a number of employees, or this revenue, then we can bump them up a letter grade in Pardot so that we can recognize who is more likely to be a match for us, or you can do this for your own clients, so that as they interact, you learn more about them, and you know who you want to spend your time with and who you want to invest with and nurturing further. And this is kind of rules that you can set up in a lot of these services so that if they fill out a form, like I said, they match a certain vertical or a number of people, you can give them a profile that they're identified as a certain type of company with as many people, and then you'll be able to grade them that way. A lot of these services offer forms and landing pages, which I know we tend to do in Drupal, but they can do it as well, and it will give you, maybe more tools out of the box as far as A/B testing goes, or anything like that, so that you're creating these custom landing pages over on the marketing automation platform, and then you send traffic to that from your emails instead of back to your Drupal site, for example. Also, they can create forms as well. So you can create a form over here, but then we also like to create forms over in Drupal a lot of times using Webform. And so these contrib modules also can integrate with that and post that data from your form back to the marketing automation software. And then activity tracking, like I said, they take actions. It's automated, but then you can receive notifications and alerts when you need to follow up with certain people after so many interactions. And why use it? People. It's at the statistics are that they're getting better leads, they're qualifying their leads, and you're seeing a higher conversion rates through efforts like that. And you're reducing errors, and you're freeing up your time so your marketing staff can pursue other activities. So here's a stat here. 80% of marketing automation users saw their numbers of leads increase. And that's from that same survey. So with Drupal, and this is where we'll see some of the potential with kind of using these things out of the box. Currently in Drupal 7, there are several marketing automation services with contrib modules. HubSpot, Eloqua, Marketo, Silverpop, and Pardot. And we're going to go through those one by one to tell you what those integrations are, what they offer. So all of them offer page tracking and web form integration, so that if you're using the Webform Contrib module and you create a lead form, you can map those fields to fields over in your marketing automation service. So when someone fills out a form, it gets pushed over to your marketing automation service. Marketo offers a little bit more integration with the user account and the fields there. So you can synchronize values between those two things, which would be ideal for, if you have a lot of offline marketing efforts, events, and you're collecting information through other channels, and that goes into Marketo, and then it can push over to your Drupal. And for authenticated user accounts, then you could use that information in your personalization if you wanted to. And then vice versa, if they're authenticating with Drupal and updating their profile there, that can be sent over to Marketo. Pardot includes path-based campaigns and scoring. I talked about scoring a little bit earlier, about if they're visiting certain pages, you can score them higher. And we'll take a closer look at that. And Silverpop allows custom event tracking. We'll take a closer look at that in a second. Let's see here. So here's page tracking. This is what an admin, if you use one of these modules and you install it on your Drupal site, you're going to set up, this is Pardot, but they're all very similar. Account IDs to integrate with your Pardot account. And then you set up pages and roles very similar to any kind of block visibility settings that you're familiar with, or Google Analytics visibility settings. Webform integration, they're all very similar here. It's just mapping keys to the Pardot or the Marketo or any other thing. You're mapping the keys back to the Webform keys so that when the post happens on your web form, it gets sent over and to using these keys. Marketo's user integration, it's very similar, just mapping keys to fields and setting up what triggers the updates for Marketo. Pardot campaigns, very kind of similar. You set up the campaign ID and name tied over in Pardot, how you set that up over in Pardot with a path, so that if you create a special landing page, because it's tied to your marketing efforts for spring 2017, you can attribute the page tracking for those paths for that specific campaign to just tighten the integration there. Scoring, very similar here. It's a path-based, so maybe you have a special promotion, you're setting up a page because it's tied to a specific email campaign. You're trying to drive traffic to this one page, and if you get people there, you want to give them, certain points over in the Pardot platform. And then Silverpop has the custom event tracking, where I kind of talked about user behaviors and what links they're clicking on, so that if you have your main navigation, sometimes you set up with your main service offerings, and you want to identify that with an event over in Silverpop, you can create a custom event tracking and add a CSS selector so that it fires when they click on that link, and that gets pushed over to Silverpop, so you can do some visitor tracking that way. All right, so web personalization, what's available in Drupal 7? We're going to go through personalization. It's about a year old. There's not really a whole lot going on with it. It was created by Dan Ashdown, and then Acquia Lift for Drupal 7. We'll look at some screenshots with that. So personalization, you enable it, you get this menu item here, and then when you go to configure it, it relies on vocabulary. So if you think about all that effort you put into segmenting your audience and getting to know them, you can create taxonomy vocabularies that match those segments, right? Verticals, interests, life cycle. So what part are they in the buyer's cycle? Are they just exploring? Are they comparing options? Are they in the purchasing phase? And so you can use these vocabularies here to categorize your content and then add weights to them. And then this module provides a custom block which uses views to kind of query that content, and it'll store that information for that user. It creates database tables and puts session data back into the database, so it learns about those visitors and what content they're reading, and categorized by these taxonomies, and then it provides a block and it serves that content up to the user to provide personalized content. It's kind of like a related content block. I think, you have a blog post, you have blog content, it has taxonomy terms, and then you have a related blog post block that shows related content to that. This goes a step further, so it kind of tracks as they read content throughout your site. So then it serves up content that they've already read, not just what the piece of content that they're reading now, but everything that they have read. On top of that, it allows you to use Drupal's site search to map search terms to those taxonomy terms, so that if they're searching, so maybe in your buyer, your constituent lifecycle taxonomy, you have the term prospect, and you want to map demo. So if someone comes to your site search and they type in demo because they want to look at the demo on your site, you can push that into their session, so then you can show them content related to prospect content. And some other examples here. So if they're looking for security updates, maybe they're interested in like support maintenance contracts, things like that. And it's kind of a bullet point rundown of everything I just said. I don't think I'm missing anything in here. Well, one thing it does on top of that is it tries to use IP address for geolocation. Last time I tested out, this service didn't really work anymore, which is unfortunate, but there might be a way to, patch or contribute back to that module to use another service to kind of get the geolocation, so you can tie it to, a geolocation taxonomy to serve content relevant to them. One example of that would be, using MediaKern as an example, we're a distributed company. We have team members that are all throughout the US involved in local user groups, and we attend Drupal, monthly meetups. So if we knew someone's incoming IP address and we could show them, relevant local user group meetups with our team members' information that they could connect to, and they're, right in the city where they're at, that would be an example of kind of showing personalized content in that way. So I think this is directly from the project page, kind of what personalization does. Again, it takes that criteria and just kind of tries to deliver that content to that individual during their site visit. Acquia Lift, just a few screenshots. Unfortunately, the 7 version, I'm not able to get a sandbox going. You have to have an account and kind of tie it in order to kind of get it going on your local. And so what Acquia Lift does is it takes that a step further, where it allows you to create those content variations and pieces, not just whole blog posts or whole pages of content, but chunk it up and create pieces of content variations for like a headline or an image or a call to action. And then it uses their service to create profiles about those site visitors and uses that information to deliver the personalized bits to them on the page. And then also it provides a UI in order for the content authors and editors to build those variations. So you can't get a technical solution out of the box with Drupal for anonymous personalization without a lot of custom work involved. But Acquia Lift provides provides those tools when you use that service, as opposed to Optimizely or those other services where the content variations are probably created in their platform, and then through JavaScript that you add to your site, it delivers those content variations. Or you do a mix of custom code on top of the variations over in those other platforms. Acquia Lift is tightly integrated with Drupal. And this is for 7, of course. Here's kind of a UI example of how you create the content variation for this headline right here. And another screenshot here.
The new lift, which is just being launched.
Acquia Lift 3. Yep.
I think they're moving away from the web integration, the personalized module. They're not going to port it to 8.
Well, I'm going to get into that. I think they are, but I think it's going to be different. So how about Drupal 8? In regards to marketing automation, last year I worked on porting Eloqua to 8. You can find a dev version in the code repository and some patches in the issue queue. I haven't worked on it so much this year. Pardot, I've been actively working on Pardot, and we'll get into that a little bit further, what's available with that. And then personalization, that is old. They've just released, well, they're releasing Acquia Lift 3, and we'll get in, some of that content is old. So Pardot and Drupal 8, this is what we have here. I've kind of straight ported all of the features from 7. And so you have the basic site tracking information that you set up here, campaigns, scores, and contact and form mappings, which is a little different. So similar kind of tracking scope, campaigns, just what we saw in 7, except that, you know, it's all using config entities in Drupal 8. Scores, and then contact form mappings is a little different. It doesn't, the 8 version is not going to integrate with Webform. I don't know if, I actually have stopped following up on the status of Webform, because I thought I was looking into it a few months ago, but Webform hasn't been ported to Drupal 8 yet. So, but on the other hand, there's contact forms, which is built into core, which is a little more robust solution than what you saw in Drupal 7 with contact forms. Contact forms in Drupal 8 are fieldable, so you can add custom fields to it. And then Pardot, what I've done is tried to allow you to pick a form that you've created, and then it provides you all of the field definitions from that form and allows you then to map it here. So same functionality as in 7, but not with web form, but with contact form.
Is there any plans for like rules integration?
For the Drupal 8 version, or any of the?
For any of these marketing automation?
No. I don't think there's any active feature development for the Drupal 7 versions, and I haven't seen anything like that. What are you thinking of in particular?
Well, we did an Infusionsoft integration, and they had an API module for Drupal 7, and so we wrote a bunch of rules.
Okay.
Rules actions. So you do certain events, triggers, that meet certain conditions, and it fires off certain information over to Infusionsoft, whether adding a user to the database, updating or syncing somebody's information, firing off an email, whatever it happens to be.
Is that, just curious, does that contrib back? Is that something I can look at in the Infusionsoft?
It is not, but it could be.
I'll talk to you afterwards so we can. I'd be interested to see what that looks like.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, no, I haven't heard of anything. I'm not actively doing anything like that with any of those. So that's Drupal 8 Pardot. The roadmap for that is continue with that contact form integration, and then kind of build on some of those form field types so that you can add a field to an entity to show a contact form from Pardot as an iframe. Form block class so that you, instead of just adding a field, maybe you want to add a block, because some people, depending on how you're building your site, would rather have a field or a block to kind of show a form and an iframe from Pardot. And then also have some ideas about how to use some of the Pardot segmentation tools and using that to personalize content on the Drupal side of things. So Acquia 3 Lift, I've recently got in touch with them. They sent me over some sales information, and we'll talk about it here. What they're planning on offering is this is the Acquia approach to personalization. So this is what Acquia Lift 3 will offer, with the end goal of kind of, so you have web, mobile, and your email marketing channels here, and all the touch points going through Acquia Lift. And I think the overall goal is to kind of decrease the buyer's journey to have them convert sooner. And how they're doing that, and we'll go through a list of features, but they're serving as a content hub. So not just your Drupal content, but any content. It sounds like they're using Acquia Lift to store that content, either through aggregating and then through syndication, making that content available on all your properties. Then on the right here, the profile manager. So all your touch points go back into Acquia Lift so that your customer profile gets updated. That can also be integrated with other third-party services. So you can either use first-party or third-party data to build that profile up, and then combined using the Content Hub and the Profile Manager, allow you to build experiences, through segmentation and rules, to build your content variations on your platform. And so that's pretty huge. I'm looking to get a sandbox this coming week so I can start playing around with it. So the big part of that for me is being able to have one place for all your content. I think that's one of the hard things with doing marketing automation, is that you want to create content on your Drupal platform and you don't want to have to recreate it over on your marketing automation platform. Or if you're creating landing pages in your marketing automation platform, you have to provide the styles for that when you've already done your theme on your Drupal site. And so you're having to do work in two places. But for Acquia Lift, it sounds like all that content is going into one place, either through aggregation, like maybe it lives elsewhere, but they're able to aggregate it and then syndicate it back out. So then you can reuse content, so you don't have to create it multiple times. And then that profile, building that constituent profile with all the touch points, email, web, or mobile apps. And here are the features. So to answer, or to address your point, one of the first features is new drag and drop UI for content targeting. So that experience builder, I think, is a UI to build those variations based on the constituent profile, their segments, and the content that's available.
But that's not sitting in Drupal. So that's more like Visual Website Optimizer or Optimizer, which
sits on top of?
On the top of that.
Okay.
Essentially, getting all the data by a JavaScript-based implementation. So the personalized module, which was done by the lift, and then there was a personalized lift module, they are not going to continue with the 8.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what is happening. So everything is just moving out in a sandbox.
Do you know how that gets tied into the Drupal content itself?
There are two modules. There is one Content Hub module, and then another is the lift module. You just have to install these two modules, which will just configure these two modules, and it will just extract the data. So nothing is happening on Drupal. It's just a connector, the two connector modules which are just doing.
Okay. Well, I'm from a dev's perspective, I'm interested to dig in to see how that actually works. I still don't know how it knows where to put it in the DOM, or how does it interact with the DOM.
That's pretty much what optimizing and Visual Website Optimizer.
Just through JavaScript and target selectors. Okay. So by plugging in selectors, they know where to put. Well, like I said, I'm pretty excited to get into the sandbox to see how it all works. But these are the features that they're looking to target, and I think. Does anyone have any other questions about marketing automation, personalization?
So you talked about the third-party data. I was really interested in that. What are you using different? Is the DMP? Are you talking about DMP platforms? Any specific one that you're using?
I don't think I understand the question.
So you talked about the third-party platforms.
Okay.
Essentially add to your profile,
Right.
Customer profile or the user profile. Any specific third-party data that you're using?
No, not that I'm using, and I don't believe MediaCurrent is either. I'm not sure though. Is that right? No.
So just we'll put you on the spot though, since you've been researching a lot of the APIs, for marketing automation. Is there one that's more stable, or that you recommend, or that's integrating more nicely, or has a good roadmap to aid?
Well, I haven't investigated all of the APIs. But the ones that I'm familiar with and doing some research is Pardot has a REST API that is very user-friendly, and that's kind of why I'm starting to focus on that. The other one I looked into related to another project was, I believe it was Silverpop, and it is not as user-friendly. It's not as clean as a REST API. It's more XML-based, and so, but I think they all just vary. The marketing automation services vary so much that their APIs are so different because it's just a completely different ballgame with each one.
We are using SharpSpring, and they have a pretty nice API, REST API, and it's cheap. The agency license comes $500 a month.
ShopSpring, SHOP.
Yeah.
There's a module for it.
Yeah, there's a module. There's 3 modules essentially. They are using a personalized module as well. They have a context module, and then they have the main module, which is connected. And we have written a custom module which essentially allows us to do on the content level, on a global level. So we are having personalized rules on a global level. So if I'm having people coming in, so any person who's being tracked by a marketing automation platform, Shastring, essentially we are reading the cookie data, and then we are just matching the taxonomy terms with that cookie data. So if a person is coming from a particular industry with a title and a location, we're just changing the content.
That sounds great. But that is all. That's contrib. You said there's modules for that.
We're going to do that. It's just right now a lot in code. There's not much in the configuration.
Right. Yeah, you get through it. You write the custom code, and then you have to abstract it out and try to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we have to make it contribute, and then we'll just contribute that. So yeah.
Cool. Shops. Nice. All right. Thank you.